Okay, I am back, my friends. This is part two of my reflection on the totality of Flickr Street, uh, and what it's meant to me, what it is, what it's been in my life, how it evolved, and I've tried to boil it down to two decent, manageable size videos rather than all the long videos that no one ever watched. I mean, the first one a lot of people watched, and then they got lost, and I get it. So I had a goal to be more concise, to communicate better, to be more linear. I actually took notes. But near the end of the last video, I realized, I'm starting to ramble. I better break it off here. So where last we left this saga is, I had delineated that there were some distinct periods in my life that led to Flickr Street, that began a thread of creativity and of creations. And the first one, see, I don't even remember without these notes now. No, I'm kidding. But I do think the notes are concise. Yeah, the first one was from the late 70s to 1981. I covered that. And that was something that my friend Thomas called Dynamite Comics. And then 1982 to 1984, I worked with some other friends here and Thomas long distance and started creating more of my own characters and my own ideas and concepts. And that was called Dynamite Comics. So that ended. There was an intermission. And then in 1986 to 1989 was Dynamite. And that was me and JJ, who had survived over from Dynamite Comics. Thomas, at the beginning of that period, Thomas was still contributing some things, and he kind of liked what I was doing, but I do think he thought some of it was a little too far out. I don't think he was, about to get into Grant Morrison or anything like I was. He did love Steve Gerber, and he loved Jack Kirby, and he loved whimsical, odd stuff. It's just his mind wasn't quite free enough. I think it could have been if, like, he hung out with people like me, but he was on his way to becoming a lawyer and living a more mainstream life in the Midwest. But he never lost his love for comics and storytelling. He just stopped really doing any storytelling except maybe in his head. And he passed away just as Christopher Pack that I talked about passed away. So two of my close childhood friends, both of whom I had worked with on creative ventures, are now deceased. They both died before they turned 40. I think Thomas died before he turned 40. Christopher died before he turned 50, a few years before. So it's rough. So hope I'm not next. Anyway, then that was 1, 2, 3 distinct periods. So then I had a period from 1990 to 2001. That really was my life, and I named the beast Flickr Street, and it was codified into exactly what it needed to be. It was meant to be. It was like something trying to give birth, and it finally came out into the sun, into the light, and had a name. And that's kind of what all this other stuff was for. I mean, what they call, colloquially, in a cliche way, growing pains, I guess. But yeah, the pregnancy period finally gave way to Flickr Street, the birth, which I retained that name later. We'll get into that. So that was like 4 major periods. So I'm going to write that down. I've up to 4 periods. And, 4 periods, and 1, 2, 3, and then 4 was 1990 to 2001. And then I dropped it for a few years. So period 5 was really a fragmentary period. It lasted, it lasted from, I'm trying to think of a way to figure out when it began again. It's kind of hard. Because what happened during that period was I was working with the Wald Newton fan community, and Philip was a farmer fan community. So I was creating a lot of pastiche fiction. And then when I met a woman I was involved with for several years, Rachel, we delved into that together, and then we also made up some other ideas together, and then we pitched Defenders pitch to Marvel Comics. So I'm going to do a whole video about that called Defenders Incorporated in the very near future. Finally going to push that out, I swear. Because I think it's interesting. I might be the only one live who thinks it's interesting. But I've actually had requests from more than one person to do a video on it. And so I shall. So we're going to flash forward up to the next year or two subsequent to that. And by this time, Rachel had gotten me involved in a cadre of independent young and old comic book creators called the Comic Book Artists Guild. And I became a full-fledged member. It was based primarily in New York and Connecticut. I spent a lot of time in New York during this period. I only met a few of those other people while I was up in that neck of the woods. Most of them I knew online, and I would talk to them on the phone quite frequently. So during that period, around 2006, I guess 2006 would be the beginning of the legit fragmented era. That's what I should call it. The fragmented era. And that's 2006 to 2011. And it's kind of bookended by two attempts to dip my fingers back into the pool of Flickr Street for material that I could use in the context of the new stuff I was doing for the Comic Book Artists Guild. And mind you, I'd also come up with some other ideas in 2001 before everything fell apart in my personal life called Desolation Falls. That didn't go very far. That's been absorbed into Flickr Street too, also now. It was inevitable. Just created some nice art and some cool ideas. You know, the next level of just kind of really wild ideas. Very influenced by films I was watching at the time and magic and things like that of that nature, occultish things. So in 2006, I, right after we had done the pitch to Marvel, up with this editor named Mark. I won't give his whole name because I think he's kind of a dick and I don't want to get sued, but he's someone who has kind of had a failing upward career in comics, and he decided to give me a chance for some reason after initially thinking I was a dick. And he was very pushy. He was quite a bit older than me. He would have been a perfect editor at Marvel or DC, but he just wasn't good enough, and that's pretty bad. And he kind of said, hey, I'm going to do some anthologies. I can't remember the name of the book he had, but he was going to do short stories with different artists and writers. Of course, we were all working for free and glad to do so. We were going to get it all in the back end. That was the good old days, man. We had the faith back then, before the economy completely was destroyed utterly for my generation and the generation after and after that. And so I pitched him a few ideas, and basically one of them took place in the Flickr Street universe. But I based it on some real life incidents that happened when I worked at Borders Books and Music, and especially events that I and my friend Rhett Thompson, ladies and gentlemen, probably my closest friend who lives in Charlotte proper, because Tim McLean lives slightly outside of Charlotte. Rhett's my last Charlottean friend, really, and he's a great guy. I met him at Borders, and he and I kind of empathize about a lot of stuff even now. But back then, it was a weird situation that we both got sucked into, and so I fictionalized it. It was quite a scandal. It was covered in some local newspapers, and I was there at ground zero. So I turned it into a story treatment called Counterfeit Messiah. And, I made up new characters based on the players and on the people I worked with at Borders, some of whom I'd made up characters for anyway. And I based a character on Rhett himself. And the background, though, was set in Hallmark. And the bookstore, I already had a bookstore based on Borders called Literatis. And so it kind of flowed. And anyone reading the treatment would not know this is part of a bigger universe. So it was my nudge, nudge, wink, wink, going in through the back door of Flickr Street and not telling anyone, because I tried to do that with the Walt Newton stuff with people, and they'd be like, no, make up your own stuff. Don't do that. That's a whole nother thing. And to come up with something original. And So I guess this was kind of cheating and kind of not, because I did come up with what I was sneaking in, with too. So um, I created another story idea called Goodbye Mona Lisa, which was this basically a conversation that became very heated between a young lesbian woman and a young transgender woman. And they were both based on people I knew who had very strong personalities. And the crux of their talk came when Mona, the trans character, uh, evoked the story of the third sex of Babylonian mythology, the integrated sorcerer who is a hermaphrodite and therefore the most powerful. And of course, that concept was directly out of Flicker Street. That character in Flicker Street was named Chrome Janae. So again, I was invoking it. I was in that universe. And the lesbian character, I based on someone I worked with, someone who I had a crush on. Unfortunately for me, that was really my own stupidity. Uh, I don't know, mental illness, loneliness. I don't know what it was, but Mona also is based on my first real transgender female friend who lived in North Carolina for a while and almost moved in with me for a while when she really had nowhere else to go. She went to New York, and Rachel helped her out. We were still in a long distance relationship. However, due to Rachel's financial situation and Rachel's mother's kind of dominating presence, the promises I made to this young lady about how much Rachel would help her didn't come to pass, and I was very disappointed in Rachel. I was very angry at her mother. I really had no um, I had no truck anymore with that lady. Um, and eventually, my friend left the country, I believe, and I don't know what has become of her. But she was transitioning, when we met each other on a film critic site called Flickster. David Lynch was her favorite filmmaker, also. Uh, she was a wonderful, and her character was a wonderful character. Um, the character based on the lesbian was not a wonderful character. I mean, it was a wonderful character, but was kind of a not very nice character, and the person was not very nice either. But I had scales over my eyes. And when I realized she wasn't very nice, I also realized it had nothing to do with her being gay or me being rejected. She just wasn't a very cool person, but she really tried hard to be a cool person. So that character's still in my story. Her name's Jinx Parmenter. I've got a portrait of her. So that was also rejected, and I forgot what the third treatment was for Mark M. And but that was fun. Writing Counterfeit Messiah was a lot of fun. My point of view character is Leo Rosegrave, who had started working on in 2000 when I stopped my last period with Flicker Street, and I was still fascinated with him because I had set up a mystery of who he is and where he came from, who he is and how he came to be, and never answered it for myself. Never received the answer through channeling. I was letting it unfold itself. But he was perfect. Um, so that was that. So as a book into this, I still worked with this on this material, and eventually a short story called Snow Leopard was published, my first and only comic book story published in a American manga style anthology called With Honor, which the aforementioned Mark had to do with shepherding, and was published by the president of the Comic Book Artists Guild. My editor was Sean T. Therian. We were close friends. My story got screwed up in editorial, and the head of the Comic Book Artists Guild told me that it would be reprinted and I'd be the first to get a copy, but he never did reprint it, nor did he print an apology, a public apology at all. So that was kind of the end of me in the Comic Book Artists Guild. But I still am friends with a few people who were in it, though, online. Some really wonderful people, some cool people. But that finally was published in 2010, I believe, and started being hyped, promoted in 2011. Yes, that's correct, 2010. Towards the end of 2010. Now, by this time, I was no longer with Rachel, and I was about to get married to my my only so far wife, my ex-wife Sarah, and again I was going down a road away from Flickr Street. Uh, so, but I eventually did incorporate Snow Leopard, the story I published, sort of into Flickr Street. It is part of Flickr Street, but it's a metafictional thing. Because otherwise I would have had to change it too much to totally jibe with the continuity of Flickr Street. I wanted it as it was a story, and it is. It's like a story within the story of Flickr Street. So if I keep creating long enough, everything I create will eventually get sucked into this vortex of Flickr Street. Um, so that was 2011. So that was the next dip, I guess, alongside Flickr Street. It wasn't for a couple of years before I really fully believed that idea about Snow Leopard. I kind of wanted to pursue Snow Leopard as its own thing. I was also working on 2 or 3 potential webcomic series with different artists and assistants. Great people. There mainly were 2. One was Iron Creek, also known by other names, but it was a Walden Newton, set in the Walden Newton universe. It was a pastiche of a lot of different things and took place in different time periods. And then it was heavily influenced by films I'd been watching in the 2000s. Then the other project was called Conclaves, which is basically my Defenders Incorporated treatment turned into a comic book script. And I actually wrote a scripts for several issues, which I've only recently found on Google Drive and reacquired. I mean, by accident almost. I thought I'd lost them forever in a computer I lost the external drive to. So at some point I'll reread them and see if I wince when I read them or if they hold up at all. But and I actually laid out, drawing wise, the first issue. And I had a few artists that almost were there with it. One, Silu Disharoon. Silu, a friend of mine on Facebook for years, he came the closest to drawing out some of my script. And he really vibed with it because he was also a very big Steve Gerber fan. And that vibe was in that story. And it was kind of dedicated to Steve Gerber. And Silu really did a good job, but he had other projects going, comic book projects, music projects, etc. But I always consider him, to be part of that project, to be kind of be the artist. And he was even going to take over Snow Leopard at one point. So that kind of ended, and then I went away from really writing these stories for a couple of years. I mean, I worked on those web comics for 2012 and 2013. So for about a year, though, there was like nothing. It was gone. So then we come up to 2013 to now. This is the 6th chapter, a final chapter. This also was began as a sideways way into Flickr Street. I decided to develop this other webcomic. I had 2 other webcomic ideas. One was called Anima Mundi, which was an adaptation of a Commandy treatment that Rich Buckler and I were going to submit to DC Vertigo. I was rejected before they didn't even accept and read the treatment like Marvel did, because I had no published writing as fiction writing, only journalism. And Buckler wasn't a big name anymore in comics. He tried to help me, and it just didn't happen. So I changed the Commandy treatment. I removed Commandy from it, but I took a lot of the ideas and I kind of made characters of some of the intelligent talking animals, and I gave it a darker spin. I took the name Anima Mundi from this incredible documentary called Anima Mundi, really unique, powerful documentary, which I have for sale on eBay for $50 if you want to purchase it. It is very rare. I mean, sometimes it goes up for $75. I doubt it will ever come back into print. So it was really a visionary kind of thing that I was going to have to work on long term and get serious about if I were going to do it justice. And I wasn't sure how to do it justice visually. And I was a little inspired by Grant Morrison here with We Three, great graphic novel of his, illustrated by Frank Quitely. The other, that was going to be a webcomic initially and evolved. The other webcomic idea was austerity, which was a term I had started to hear floating around politically for a while, and so there's a lot of irony in me choosing that name. Irony I didn't see at the time. I just thought it sounded cool. I kind of knew what it meant, the dictionary definition, but I wasn't completely keyed into what it was meaning in the culture, sociopolitically, socioeconomically, at the time and up to now. So Austerity was a female assassin, cyborg kind of character, possibly in the near future. Hard to say. It was going to be extremely violent and rather sexual. I was very influenced by European comics and especially female archetypal science fiction adult comics characters like Barbarella, not the movie Barbarella, but the comic book, and Inky Bilal's character Jill from Nico Pole trilogy. I reviewed the movie based on Immortal on this channel. Check it out. And and also on Octobriana, an open source character that a movie trailer was made for that was really incredible, but the movie was never finished. She was like a Soviet superwoman. And of course, I'd always liked characters like that. I loved the Valkyrie and Thundra from Marvel, and they both were pretty much the main characters in my Defenders treatment. There were a few other main characters, but they were the main female characters. Anyway, so I didn't really do much with Austerity, just a drawing or two and just some notes. So a year or two went by, and I wasn't doing much of anything creatively. I was still working on my wife's website. I was actually writing for a living finally, but not for very much. Reviewing comic books for about a year for this website called Comics Forge, just independent comics. So that didn't end that great, but yeah, it could have ended worse, I guess. But yeah, I got some money out of it. I was under a lot of pressure, so I went back to work in retail after not doing it for 4.5 years, and that was tough. It was a tough time in my life. But I don't know, Austerity stuck with me, and I decided to incorporate her, or I should say, she just incorporated herself into Flicker Street, and I had a whole new story arc called Austerity, and I worked on it from 2013 to 2016. Brought in my characters right from where I left off, and within the story, it had been several years, not the same amount of years, not the same years, but there had been a gap. And in between that gap, the only story that took place that I'd done was Counterfeit Messiah, but I played off that story too. I wove it all together, and Austerity was like my attempt to get back into it full time. And I killed off a ton of my existing characters, introduced a bunch of new characters, and further developed a ton of existing characters. It was an evolution. It was a purging. It was a reclamation of this world. And so I decided to write an epic length kind of backstory to this world, which eventually became known as Flicker Street: The Birth, which I named after, tip of the hat to Twin Peaks: The Return. And I think like 2014, I began writing on it, mid 2014. And it came in chapters, long chapters, little breakdown subsections, a chronological order from like 20,000 years ago up to, well, where I left off with it finally was 1980. And it covered pretty much everything, and it basically allowed me to make sense of my universe, like what it was like. And so it was dealing on a more cosmic and science fiction level than the present day stories I was doing, which had a lot of those elements, but were much more grounded and raw and character based. This stuff was more plot based. So I wrote it like a long synopsis with some dialogue, like a scriptment, script treatment, as they call them. Some Hollywood writers use that term. And so I did it, and I did it over quite a long time, all through 2015. I went through enormous changes in 2015. And a few months after moving in here, which was the biggest change, and being separated from my wife, I was still writing it, but I felt like I was on autopilot. I felt the quality of the writing was suffering. It was becoming even more a cliched saga kind of thing. And so toward the very end of 2015, I, not deliberately, but I let it go. I didn't make a conscious decision. I couldn't hold on anymore. I think I took a glance or two at it around February 2017 when I got out of psychiatric hospital that I'd been in for a while. And I did jot down some new character ideas while I was there. So I also picked back up Austerity and finished the story. And created, by the end of the year, I'd created a whole new character, Ellinger, and a character arc called Ellinger, and a whole new direction directly from everything in Austerity. My continuity was tight. I was feeling the characters. I was channeling again. And late summer, I was inspired by a friend of mine, an artist named Delphin, and I decided to start drawing these characters again. And this time, I was going to draw them realistically as portraits, the way I'd envisioned doing way back in high school. And hasn't been easy for me. I'm not as fast as I was then. I'm not as good as I was then. I don't have as much energy as I did then. But I've done, I don't know, 30 proper ones. By now I was hoping to have done 100. But they're all over my Facebook pages, my DeviantArt. I've shared them with a lot of friends who might be watching this, and they'll all end up on my website eventually. Right now, only one or two of those pieces are up there, including my signature piece, Frankie. That's the green, big-eyed girl. She's not really green. She's actually like this. She's white, but the picture's green. So I've continued from there, and one of the things I did when I picked things back up was toward the end of 2017, early 2018. I reread the Flicker Street, the birth document, and I began this long, meticulous editing process. And I didn't spend a lot of time and energy, but I also wanted to finish the last chapter that I had just not finished. I'd had a bunch of notes for it and an outline and a little bit of it written, and then I had an 18th chapter sketched out in notes. So the last one I'd published was 16 that I'd put on my personal website. I'd put them all on my personal website. I started serializing the newly edited, revised, approved versions on pages I made toward the end of or mid 2017. I made Flicker Street, Henry Covert's Flicker Street official page on Facebook, and I began serializing the stuff there. And as I went, as I finished editing a part or a chapter, I would post it, a complete chapter. But real life and everything, I kind of let it drag through 2018 and into 2019. By that time, I had most of them up. But then my life kind of went upside down yet again in 2019. But I immediately, while it went, it turned upside down, I immediately opened the Flicker Street Studio, which is this here, and I created the virtual opening, which, was fun but small. And I did portraits. I collected my portraits, and I did Frankie. And that one I did in 2 hours. I was a frenzy of inspiration, and she became my muse character. And so goes a new wave of characters. She's a character created for the Ellinger arc and will be important going forward. So then I picked up the pieces of Flicker Street, the birth, edited them, and finally posted chapter 17 on my pages. I think in 2020 I did that. And I decided not to do an 18th chapter. I decided to leave it interrupted, but at a decent stopping point, kind of here's where we end, there's more to come kind of thing, but I didn't edit it that way. I just kind of left it there, where we are in 1980 in this universe, in this reality. So I've continued to write Ellinger. I've continued to write all through it. My experiences working once again in retail now have really informed a lot of what I'm doing. My experiences with left-wing politics, especially online, has really, really influenced what I'm doing. And Ellinger is, me now and where my thought is. And it's been the easiest thing to write of all of it. And my turning point for that, I think, was definitely my relationship with my ex-fiance. She was a huge Flicker Street fan. She totally got it. She loved the characters, and she totally got the creative process and let me know what it was. They helped me embrace magic and mysticism and occultism again, to an extent in reality, not to the extent that she has, which is, I'm not knocking her. I think it's incredible that she's a witch and a sacred artist and all that stuff. Um, but it opened up something for me, so that I owe her as a creator. And it made me feel more proud of what I was doing, and that's kind of why the Flicker Street Studio kind of exploded into being, and Frankie exploded onto paper a week after my ex fiance left here, because um, the studio was built for her, and it became like a shrine to her, but it also was a testament to my ability to survive and endure, and that Flicker Street was the way forward, which my friend Bill White had told me when my divorce, when my separation from my wife was taking place. He said to divert my energy into that, and I did write on it quite a bit during 2016. But 2016 was a tough time. It was a recovery time. But I kept working on it. Like I said, I finished Austerity, and I laid the groundwork for more stuff, which in 2017 became Ellinger. 2017 was a great year for me. It was one of the greatest years of my life. I'm hoping it won't be the last great year of my life, but considering the way the world is going, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if any of us have any great years left. But 1 second, I'm going to grab something. That all having been said, this draws to a close the second and final chapter of this. So this is the arc of Flicker Street. 6 phases in my life, and there's some interstices in between in there. But I wanted to lay it all out more concisely, chronologically, and with a minimum, if possible, of wild tangents and etc. So that's how I stand, and that's what it is. So right now, it's like I consider it a possible multimedia empire, but I know it may never get that way because economically, I'm desperately in need of help. I need your help. Please help me. I'm seriously, I put up 2 fundraisers, and I hate to ask for help. It's horrible. But I could really lose my house in a few months if I don't get over this particular bad spot. So if you do support me as a person or as a creator and want to see me in Flicker Street Studios remain open, so to speak, because that's what my house is, essentially, and me to realize the vision that I've been talking about to you today, then please consider donating to my Facebook fundraiser or my GoFundMe, or to me direct via PayPal at leo.rosegrave@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and thank you for everyone who's been a fan or a supporter of Flicker Street at any point in my life. Take care. Farewell.